And like the reason why these net payments exist is so that you have that time to receive the payment. I don't understand like why you're just incompetent in like making that happen. And that's literally your job.
Right. So like I did not like that. That was like, I would say in my top 5 of just like least favorite things that has happened.
Hey guys, welcome back to another episode. So today's episode is going to be a really fun one because this one is with one of my friends, Veronica, and she is a content creator lawyer. The way that we kind of connected on social media was very out of the blue. She DM'd me about a CrossFit movement. She was asking me how I was able to really power through lots of reps of wall balls, and I gave her a breathing technique. And we have been inseparable since. I didn't even know that she was a content creator lawyer. And it was just crazy how things aligned because she has been able to speak for a lot of my students in my programs. I think I've been able to invite her twice in my accelerator program and in my in-person mastermind. And so she's a very sweet human. And we have a lot of juicy content for you guys that we are so excited to share. And before we jump into the episode, I wanted to read a little bit about her bio. So Veronica Ramirez is a lawyer and owner of Curator Counsel PLLC, a firm dedicated to serving influencers. So when she's not advising clients, she's creating engaging educational content on short form social platforms, writing about industry-related news in the creator economy, or binging a competition reality series. So she is a lawyer, but a true creative at heart. So without further ado, let's jump into the episode.
Hey guys, welcome back to another episode. So today we are being joined by a special person, and we have been friends for quite a few years. And the way that we started being friends was kind of not like in a sense of like you're in the influencer space, you're in the influencer space. No. We talked about CrossFit.
As any CrossFitter would. I feel like that's very on brand with that cult. And I'm a proud member of the cult. If I'm going to see somebody doing CrossFit, I'm immediately sliding in the DMs. I'm like, oh my God, I hate wall balls.
Yeah. Oh, I know. That was the thing, right? You responded to me and you were like, oh, I hate doing wall balls. And I gave you a hack of like how I did it.
Breathing.
Yeah, breathing. Yep.
Breathing. Basic breathing. You know?
Yeah, because sometimes we forget.
It is so funny how something like this movement just makes you just forget how to just do a basic function like breathing. And
right.
It sounds stupid you listening to this right now, but like I promise you, try it and you let me know how easy it was for you to breathe. Okay?
Yeah, but I just love how we started our connection so organically because obviously like we both work in the influencer industry. You're a creator lawyer and I'm a talent manager. But then outside of that, like we have so much in common. Like, you have a Filipino family. I have a Filipino family.
My in-laws. In case everyone's wondering, my in-laws.
Yeah, but anyways, like Veronica's here to chat all things influencer industry, creator economy, the legal side of the business, and just, best practices. And so thank you so much for hopping in.
Obviously. I love this. We always do this. We always talk about this.
I know. This is just us like kikiing, I feel like.
Pretty much just now we captured it on video and we're having a little FaceTime, essentially.
Yeah, essentially, because we do this all the time in the DMs, but or on threads, we kiki on threads too.
Yeah, we do.
But I did want to, like, I'm very interested on like how you got started in the creator influencer space, because I mean, like when you started, it wasn't really like prominent that there were creator lawyers. It was always kind of like in the teams of brands, they're in the teams of agencies and things like that, but not necessarily like, oh, I am a creator lawyer for content creators and influencers. Like what drew you to this industry?
Oh, man, I think a few things. Like my background, just going back to as far as undergrad, was in PR and political science, but PR really is where I think that first taste of like social media and how the power of social media was like where I first saw it. And of course, just growing up with the internet, I grew up in a generation, I'm a millennial. So I grew up with MySpace, Facebook. Like I've traversed all of these different platforms as a user, but And of course, grew to appreciate, people like bloggers, influencers, YouTubers, TikTokers, right? Like, it's just expanded so much. And my interest in that like intersection with the law, though, didn't really happen until law school. I just didn't know how that could even be possible as a lawyer or as a law student, because I didn't have lawyers in my immediate family. Extended family I did, but I wasn't really close to them to like ask them about, the opportunities. I just knew that lawyering or being in the legal field was probably the best fit for my personal like skill set. So it wasn't until my second year of law school that I had to come up with a note topic for law review. So that's a research paper that you basically come up with. Sometimes people get grouped up with a faculty advisor. I literally just did this on my own with my notes editor. I learned about the FTC's regulations, and that's really where I was like, oh my God, that's right. I mean, we can't be consuming all of this, like all these advertisements online without somebody, regulating this, somebody saying, hey, like these are the boundaries that you have to kind of like fall within and make sure that you're not deceiving people or lying to your audience and stuff like that. And protecting consumers. I came up with this note topic. I literally had zero expectations because law review is a very serious, publication. People are talking about more serious things and not about affiliate links and outfit posts like I was.
Yeah.
So I was just kind of like, all right, I did it. I checked it off my list and that's all good. And I got selected for publication. I even got a scholarship for it. And I was just like, wow.
Amazing.
So there is something to it.
Yeah.
And
there's a need.
Right. And so I was just like so excited about that. But, I, with my, background, I'm Hispanic. I, grew up with, going for the sure thing, going for the secure job and all that stuff. And for me, that wasn't entertainment. And that, especially with where I was headed, I was headed back to upstate New York, which is very rural and not exactly a place where a lot of law firms that work in the entertainment space exist. So I was just like, well, I got to go with the sure thing. So I worked in litigation and I paused that idea of like entering the space, but kept tabs on it, of course, because hello, I love social media and hello, I'm still a lawyer. So of course, those lawsuits and everything like that just fascinated me. But, it's 2020, height of the pandemic, right? Beginning of the pandemic. And things were not going well with me and the firm. I will say it was just terrible. There was a lot of things personally that were not going so great. I really was thinking about like, okay, what do I really want to do this for the rest of my life? And I was a construction litigator. I was a commercial litigator. So I was working on like general contractor cases, subcontractor cases, disputes, and all that fun stuff, and other things too, because it was a general firm. So they had like a little bit of everything. I was like, wouldn't it be crazy if I opened my own law firm to represent influencers? And like, I thought it, and then I said it. And so when I said it to my husband, who was like the perfect person to share this idea with, he was like, yeah, why not? Go for it. And I was just like, that was just enough to get me going. I was like, okay.
Awesome.
So I did. And I did it in 2021. And here I am 3 years later, still chugging along.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. It was just like, a little project in school and then it just sprouted into something more. Amazing. Yeah. I love that. I mean, for me, like it was just because I was a makeup hoarder and that's how it started.
And look at that. And it evolves. That's the other thing that's so interesting about your career is that you were a creator first and you understand exactly what your students go through when first starting and then committing and then pivoting.
Yeah, exactly.
And scaling.
Yeah.
Like, amazing.
Yeah. And I mean, all of the things is like transferable too. And so like, I mean, my parents were obviously worried when I jumped into this like full time. They were like, what are you going to do? You have 2 degrees. Like, why are you putting it to waste? But I'm like, it's not a waste. A lot of it was transferable into business.
Yeah.
And so, yeah. I love that you talked about like, your interest in the FTC disclosures and things like that. And so I'll just jump into it. So I had a conversation with a creator last week. She was in my program and she was talking about how there was a live streamer who is they stream like almost daily and things like that. And they have like product placement in the background.
Mm-hmm.
And apparently, like, the reason why, this live streamer is able to, pay for bills, like buy like all these expensive stuff, things like that, is because the company whose like product is in the background
Mm-hmm.
is paying them to put it in the background, but there are no disclosures. And so he talked about it,
Mm-hmm.
that like, the reason why was because of that brand. But
Mm-hmm.
like, as far as the live stream as it's going, there's no like sort of disclosures. And so what are
Mm-hmm.
your thoughts on this? Like, what are the things that streamers need to keep in mind when a brand is like, we want you to just like put product placement? It's
Oh.
not necessarily an ad to where you're
Mm-hmm.
talking about the product, but it's just sitting there. Because I know like
Yeah.
the FTC added new rules for live streamers, but like that's kind of misleading as well, isn't it?
In a way, it is. And the thing, before we kind of like get into why, I think it's important to kind of set like the foundation around the FTC's regulations and to understand why they exist. So the reason why we have these regulations with the FTC is that the FTC is concerned about deceptive advertisement practices. That's one of its functions, right? So when we talk about these regulations and disclosure guidelines, we're thinking about what does it take? What do we have to do to make sure that the audience, that the consumer is on the same page about why it is that they're seeing a piece of content, right?
Mm-hmm.
And why it is we're seeing a specific product in the content, right? So the FTC has said, hey, look, we need you to make disclosures, basically call outs within certain places in your content. And the placement and where and how often is it's pretty much dictated by how it is that it's being presented, right?
Right.
So the way that you're going to disclose for a picture versus a video versus a live stream are going to have a different set of rules, because the environments in which a consumer can kind of come in and out of that content or view it or see it is going to change, right?
Yeah.
And so we have to account for all of those different scenarios.
Right.
And when it comes to live streaming, the way that this disclosures are supposed to happen is that people are supposed to be making disclosures throughout the stream to account for followers that are coming in and out of the stream.
Right.
Because you're not going to know like that if you just missed them talking about the fact that they were sponsored. So the frequency, the cadence is really going to be dictated by how long it is that this person is streaming. Now, when it comes to product integrations, that is such an interesting wrinkle, because disclosures are also not only dictated by how it is that you're presenting this product, so like video, photo, whatever, but it also is dictated by how it is you're endorsing the product, right? And in this case, we're only seeing it visually. The streamer's not talking about it. They're not saying like, I'm obsessed with this product. They're not drinking it. They're not doing anything, right? So then the question becomes, okay, well, what do they have to do, right? And since it's visual, like it's visually there, and it's visually there because the brand sponsored it, right? It would be prudent to have a visual disclosure come up every so often to alert your audience that, hey, the reason why you're seeing, this product behind me is because I'm being paid to do that.
Yeah.
Without more, really. Like if that's all that's happening, that's really what should be happening. And it should be happening, like I just said, every so often it should kind of pop up and be like, sponsored by brand or brand partner, right? Like there are specific call outs, specific disclosures that the FTC has said like that will be enough for people to kind of get on the same page. But the whole point is that you want to get everybody on the same page about the fact that there's a reason, a material connection, that's what it's called, behind why it is people are posting about it or featuring the product in the content. And when you think about who that person is, it is not your savvy follower. It is not somebody that is aware that, yeah, of course, we're seeing that fridge full of whatever because they're getting paid. It's like, you're thinking about your grandma. You're thinking about somebody that's not very familiar with the internet and how social media marketing works. So it has to be very deliberate, very overt. And sometimes the call outs that the FTC expects is not really considering all of the other problems that people talk about when they're talking about their issues with the performance of sponsored content in general.
Yeah. Yeah. So how would that differ from, like, let's say a movie product integration?
So context matters, right? Because the
Yeah.
reason why there isn't that same level of, of a burden in the movie context versus social media is that when you step into a movie theater, you know what you're watching right now is fictional. None of this exists, right? Like none of this is actually reality, right?
Yeah.
But when we're in social media, this kind of category of advertising is called native advertising, right? Because it looks like the content looks like it's just content that could be organic, right? It could be just, stuff that's native to the platform. So it's not really like there is a purpose behind it. So there is a reason for that, because you need to distinguish that, like, hey, this isn't just like my run of the mill, I just felt like talking about this out of the goodness of my heart. It's like, I'm doing this because I'm getting paid, I'm getting gifted product, or I stand to make some kind of commission by talking about it. And those are like basically examples of material connections that warrant those disclosures, those call outs that you need to include in your content.
Yeah. So what if, like, you talked about, let's say you partnered with a brand in the past, or you were gifted a product, and then you mentioned it in another video, but it's no longer a sponsored video. Like, what is the best practice there to say, like, oh, I worked with this brand like last year or something like that?
Yeah. So I think that the the prudent approach, right, is to, of course, err on the side of caution and disclose that. But the FTC is kind of sad that, like, it really is going to be dictated by the value. So one example that they include in this, like, super helpful document, it's like an FAQ document where they're answering questions about specific scenarios, this being one of them, is it involved like a car. Somebody got a free car out of their partnership. So obviously this person is still going to be using this car for years to come, but the partnership was only lasting a year. Now they're out of the contract with this, car manufacturer, but they're still in the car cleaning it or talking about how much they love it. And in that case, the FTC is like, look, that car is not cheap. So, like, you're going to have to keep, disclosing the fact that you have worked with them or that you are a partner of theirs, even though that relationship has been like distinct, like basically done, right? But if we're talking about something that's maybe not as high ticket, then the FTC is kind of like, there's some room for discretion there. Like, a video game, for example, like they're kind of like, yeah, once you're done, it's okay. We get it,
Yeah. And I think, like, the reason why, I think a lot of, brands and creators trying very hard to, like, not have to disclose is because of these platforms suppressing, views for, like, organic content where you're talking about, like, a specific product. And we know why that is. It's because they're like, okay, we don't get a portion of this sponsored ad, and so we're going to do our best to, like, get you to put Spark ads on it or, boost it and things like that.
Yeah.
And so it's just unfortunate that, like, all of these entities are, like, kind of battling against each other.
Yeah. And even consumer behavior, right? Because that's the other thing that happens, is that sometimes it may not even be the algorithm. It could literally just be that people have a tendency to just
they're like, oh my God, ad, don't immediately, don't trust you, or like, you're just trying to sell me something.
Yeah. And you're just like, well, this isn't really done for free. So we do work, we do have to, come up with an income to be able to support these things.
Exactly.
And there's a lot of that's happening. It's a whole, like, I feel like mixture of things, and then there's also the creative direction and all of these other things that kind of contribute to a lot of these gripes that creators have about the sponsored piece. And, unfortunately, the FTC doesn't care.
Yeah, and because, like, the creator and the influencer is the one that's most front facing, they're like the one that gets all of it, essentially.
Yeah, from like both sides. Like the brand's like, why isn't this performing well? And then the consumers are like, you better be transparent. Or like, it's a battle. It's a battle, and it's, at the end of the day, you want to do this with integrity. Is kind of my view, and that means being transparent. And if it comes at a cost, right? A dip, you know, so be
Then
it.
yeah,
But you got
it's
paid.
to be right, exactly. And so like, I mean, I know there's like creators that still don't follow disclosures. We
Mhm.
still see that every day. We like send them to each other. And then, or, you know, even copyright, you know, copyrighted music or non-commercial sounds, things like that.
Yep.
How do you think the FTC will double down on this in the future?
You know, I don't know. It's hard to say because the FTC is an agency that's responsible for like so many other things,
Right. Yeah.
right?
It's
So
like everything in business, like they are responsible for.
yeah. So that's so hard to put on an agency. I don't know if they necessarily have the resources, but I would not be surprised if they start developing tools or tech to be able to police it better.
Yeah.
Because there really is no other way but to kind of get into tech and to get into tools that will help automate some of that, you know, part
Mhm.
of their job.
Yeah.
The other thing too is about consumers, right? Consumers who feel deceived file reports, right? And they'll
Right.
respond. I'm assuming that they do some sort of assessment before they kind of just go all in, but
Mhm.
that's another way that, you know, the FTC is kind of like brought up to speed on, you know, deceptive practices and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
there's that too. The other thing that I don't think people realize is that consumers also can file lawsuits
Yeah.
for deceptive ad practices. It happens. I mean, I think there's one about a crunch wrap and like the thickness of the crunch wrap or something. I might be getting that wrong, so don't quote me, but like, you know, that it could get that nitty gritty, you know. There's also that, right? Like there are
Mhm.
different mechanisms that exist that hopefully deter people from doing it. Social media though is such a bear that my only potential solution, theory, whatever you want to call it, in terms of what are they going to do to respond to this influx of content that we're dealing with, is tech, because it's
Yeah.
just there's so much, it's so vast.
Right. And I mean, like Instagram and TikTok already have these, you know, all these social media platforms already have like
Mhm.
the tech available to be like, oh, this seems like an ad. Do you want to put a disclosure on it? And
Yeah.
so it's only a matter of time before, you know, they let the FTC have access to it, I guess.
Yeah. And on that point, you know, it's not really the platform's job to be doing that. It's kind of like they're doing that as a courtesy.
Yeah.
Really.
No, totally.
And that's kind of a thing that I don't think a lot of people get, is that it's not really their responsibility. It's really the responsibility of like the advertiser, the creator, and whoever else may be involved in creating that ad.
Let's segue a little bit on kind of current events, I guess. Like there's plenty. But, you know, there's this news going around on social about a fashion influencer suing another influencer for stealing content, or like the content idea, or basically, I guess, like ripping it bar for bar.
Yeah.
We've also seen Marc Jacobs post a video with Nara Smith in there, where the video was also like bar for bar, like copied from another creator. What are your thoughts on this?
This is like this is just on the verge of becoming, I think, a bigger or more pervasive issue, and there are consequences of ruling in favor of people that are aggrieved by this, you know, understandably, that I don't think that the legal field is prepared to do
Yeah.
right now. So the problem that I think a lot of people are spotting with respect to the lawsuit that's been filed right now is that it is hard to distinguish or specify what exactly are we protecting. Aesthetic is not exactly, you know, enough.
Right.
Because when you're registering for a copyright, just to kind of put things into context, you're specifying like what exactly you're protecting, right?
Yeah.
It might be the exact image, right? But is it all of the elements of the image? Like it really depends on what it is that your registration says, right?
Yeah.
Specifics,
exactly.
like all of those details matter.
Even like font, down to the font, down to like the color, like Yeah,
Mhm.
it's everything.
And then there's stuff that you have to disclaim that's like, it doesn't belong to you. And like, it can get very nitty gritty. So it's really just like, it is going to be very difficult to separate, what exactly
Mhm.
are we fighting about? And,
Mhm.
and then to be able to say those things per se are going to be protectable, right?
Mhm.
Because, at the end of the day, a lot of these cases that, come up, right, could be very helpful and informative to future people that are affected by this. Now, what's happening with this influencer is not unique. We see this all the time. I think
All the time.
when I think about this, I'm like, hello, Christian girl autumn, like Christian girl, like autumn, like that is a whole aesthetic that I'm pretty sure everybody goes to that random highway in Vermont and takes the same picture in the big hat and plaid scarf. Like,
okay, it's on my Pinterest. I'm gonna recreate the exact same photo.
right. So if we give somebody like, let's say, the face of Christian Girl Autumn, which I think is CM Coving, who I used to love. I used to love to follow her. She was one of my like favorites when I was younger. If we gave her the ammunition to say, hey, you saw that photo and how everybody else recreated that photo, I don't know. From a policy perspective, like I could see why people are reluctant to agree or side with creators in that instance, right? Because it's got to be super specific. And when we're seeing something as pervasive as that aesthetic that this creator is kind of trying to protect in her lawsuit, it's like, I don't know. And so that's kind of where we have to leave it, is that I really don't know,
right,
that we can see that lawsuit going very far. But we'll see. With Nora Smith and this Marc Jacobs ad, did you know that the original creator was working with Marc Jacobs on a gifted collaboration?
Yeah, that was what I heard as well.
Yeah. And so I saw the original creator's video. So that's my source of information. I found that interesting because when you work with brands as a creator, right? And even on like a gifted basis, you would hope that you have some sort of contract.
Yeah.
That would outline, everybody's like rights and expectations and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not really sure how deep the conversations were between, the original creator and Marc Jacobs. And I know that this original creator literally has no dog in this fight. She really has no interest to pursue legal stuff, but just kind of using this as an example for other people to kind of like figure out like where they sit. Something like this to me felt pretty derivative. Mm-hmm. In my opinion, I felt like that video was very derivative of the original creator's work, and derivatives, it's not only just the first work, but it could be other works. And in this case, there are two videos that seem to be kind of like the source of inspiration, but it's the same problem, right? Like, are we trying to say now as a society that we want to kind of hamper creativity by like, preventing against, other people kind of taking their own spin and stuff like that? I don't know. So it's so hard to draw the line, with this case. And it's so hard to, really provide short form creators who are producing a lot of content all the time. And they're also looking at other people to make content and make it their own. Yeah. That it's like, where do we draw the line? And with this case, to me, it felt very derivative. So I could see why people are up in arms about this particular video. But in terms of like success, it's kind of the same problem as the aesthetic issue. Is like, okay, well,
I think for me, it was just like the fact that, like obviously like I hope there was a contract in place for the gifting.
Yeah.
Probably wasn't, because if it was gifted, like sometimes they just like don't care too much about the contract.
Right.
But like for me too, it's like, oh, so they paid Nora Smith to create this video and then this person only got the gift. And so to me, I'm just like, ultimately, like it's Marc Jacobs's problem. And then also, was Nara like brief? I mean, I'm pretty sure if it was bar for bar, like I'm sure she's seen it.
Right. Like I have to wonder, like I think there's a couple of things, right? I agree with you about this being a Marc Jacobs issue, because if Marc Jacobs is directing my client, the creator, to recreate something that they've already had produced before by another creator, I as the team, right? Even as if I'm not briefed in, let's say I'm not a lawyer for a second, but if I'm just a regular creator, I'm thinking that I have the permission to do that, right? Like I have the ability to do that, and that there isn't any like rights or clearances that have to kind of be done or credit or anything, right? Because I could understand where that could be something that was not communicated, right? I could see a scenario where that was not communicated at all by Mark Jacobs and the Nara Smith team.
Yeah.
That being said, right, situations like this are a lesson, right? In, you know, as a creator, as an entrepreneur, right, that if you are being asked to reproduce something, that it might be helpful to ask those follow-up questions to say,
Right.
great, I love this idea. I really think I could see how this could fit in with what I do as a creator as well. But have we gotten the right clearances? Like, has this person been clued in? Like, you know, where do they kind of like sit? Where do they fit in here? Because another thing that could have happened, and I'm not saying this is true or not, but I could also see a situation where the video maybe didn't look like a video that was like posted online, like social media wise. Like maybe it was the raw file, and like the raw file doesn't have the username. Now with the intro thing, something tells me that she did maybe do a little bit of research, or the team did a little bit of research and probably found the other video. But let's put that aside for a second. That could also be, you know, a situation too.
Because I've seen that a lot with UGC contracts or like partnerships where they will send you, oh, these are, you know, some examples and we want you to recreate the same thing, or like they give you specific bar for bar script instructions and they're like, oh, we're gonna edit everything, or they just, you know, like tell you like, this is, you know, we're having a lot of creators do this exact same thing, or just like things like that. And to where like obviously the creator is not clued in on everything.
Right. And so you have to think about the original contract, which we just like kind of mentioned, right? And if the original contract, in the ideal world where Mark Jacobs did nothing wrong, the original contract would have given Mark Jacobs the ability to make derivatives of the work produced under the agreement, right? So that would mean that they would have been able to share this video with Nara's team, and like Nara's team would have been able to make a work based on that video. That's basically what a derivative is. And you know, in the creator space, it's kind of like there's going to always be this balance, right? Where it's like we want to encourage creativity, but we also want to protect people from being taken advantage of, right? And that's kind of how it feels in this situation, because, you know, like this creator mentioned, she worked for free, and like you mentioned, she worked for free, and then they turned around and paid Nara to basically make the same thing. And it obviously took off. I mean, I saw it and I was like, oh, that's super cool. And then I saw the videos about, you know, what was going on, and I was like, oh, wow, you know. So it's tough, you know. It's super tough to kind of find the balance for creators.
Right. Yeah. So, ugh, man. Ick.
I know.
But let's talk about that. What are some icks that you have about the influencer space?
Oh my god. I don't know if we have enough time.
Okay, top 3.
Okay, I hate artificial deadlines. I hate them. I hate when we get a contract and they're like, okay, so we're gonna have to have this signed by end of day.
Oh god. Or like Friday at like 5 p.m. when nobody is going to review this until Monday.
And guess what happens? Guess what happens every time? I send a little email. I'm like, yeah, no, that's not gonna happen. I will get back to you with our red lines, and you know, we'll be in touch. And guess what? I wait a week and a half to get a subsequent round of feedback. So
right, like it takes them forever to give us feedback, but like when they need it yesterday. It's always like on the brand's side that it's like, I'm just like, oh, like you took 2 weeks to approve this and then you want the content done tomorrow.
Yeah. Right. And I also needed my payment like net 30, but like here we are net 60, still waiting. So
Oh god.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So
We're working on brands together on that.
yes, yes. And seriously, with payment schedules and like late payments, like I put aside because there's always like a human element to all of that.
Yeah.
But one thing that really rubbed me recently was, this agency that literally took zero responsibility for their tardiness. It was just like, it took a lot of persistence, and it took a lot of like, I had to kind of like use my lawyer voice to kind of say like, why are we waiting this long, and why is it taking you this long to resolve a known issue with payment and transmitting it? And instead of saying, you know what, you're right, like we probably should have identified this sooner when we allegedly first tried to pay on time, but here we are 2 months later and you still haven't tried again. I don't know.
And like the reason why these net payments exist is so that you have that time to receive the payment.
Right.
And so I don't understand like why you're just incompetent in like making that happen. And that's literally your job.
Right. So like I did not like that. That was like, I would say in my top 5 of just like least favorite things that has happened. But another ick of mine recently has been just like perpetuating like a lot of unrealistic expectations in the creator industry. Like I know that I'm still considered fairly new compared to you, compared to so many other people who have been working in this industry who have way more experience. But like even in my 3.5 years, like I'm able to spot something that is not realistic. And for me, there are just a lot of unrealistic things that I think people are sharing online, and really need to be careful about how it is that they're framing it. Because of course there are things that, ideally we would like to see in contracts, or ideally we would like to see happen in our, talent management relationships and things like that. But when people speak about their experience in the creator economy in absolutes, I immediately assign less credibility in that statement.
Yeah, no, I agree. Or like, for example, I've seen this the other day on Threads, like, I absolutely not accept net 30, like, unless they're willing to pay 50% upfront at least, or 20% upfront at least, like, then I will work with them. Otherwise I won't. I'm like, how long have you been working in this space? Because like net 30's been around for a really long time. And so I'm just like, in what world? Like it's just, to me, it's just like, this is so unrealistic. I mean, even with like businesses and just corporations, like when you start a new job, you don't get paid right away. Like that is whatever your first paycheck is from the last month that you worked. And so it's always going to be like that. And so you have to, and I know this because I was like literally penny pinching in my first job, but like, that's how I understood it. And that's why for me, like, okay, net 30 like totally makes sense to me. Like that was just like, okay, yeah, like never going to believe you again, or I'm just going to take everything you say with a grain of salt.
Yes. Like the grain of salt maybe like at first was kind of like a little bit bigger. I was like, oh, we've got seasoning, we've got flavor. And now I'm like, it's that grain of salt is very fine, like a very fine grain. I understand that, maybe part of it is just trying to promote, better, more equitable things. Like I think that there is good in everybody that tries to like share nuggets of wisdom. I really think that it's important, especially if your niche is about supporting other creators and helping them in some way, is to be realistic. And that's kind of how I feel about what I share and what I talk about online, is that I'm not trying to set unrealistic expectations or precedent, because it wouldn't be fair to you to say that this is always the case. That this is always going to be what you're going to get, that you're always going to get X amount like more because you worked with me. Like, it's just, that's not honest.
Yeah, that's why my answer is always, it depends.
We get it. I get it. Lawyers get
like
it.
No, so my ADHD just goes in like a million different directions, and like for me, I'm always thinking about all the possibilities of like, okay, well, it's not always going to happen, but like when it does, this is what happens. And so it really depends. frankly, I don't know you. And so I don't know how much you should be charging.
Those, oh my gosh, right? That's right in there in my like unrealistic expectations, right? Is like, you know, the rates without context thing is really just like,
Yeah.
you know, it's okay to say, you know, baseline, you know, based on what I'm seeing, somewhere around here. But
Yeah.
is that per se going to be your rate every time? No, because
No.
not everybody, like, there's so many factors. It depends.
Yeah, it depends. It depends on the brand. It depends on what they're asking you to do. And it depends on what's included in the contract and what's not. And so,
Yes. But I do think that everyone should have, as Tyra Banks would say, a get out of bed number, right? Like there's like a bare minimum
yep.
that like you have to like set for yourself, because
Yeah.
nobody else is going to set that but you, right?
Yeah.
Like, and in business too, right? It's just like the least that I will accept, you know, is this.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Otherwise, don't bother me.
Yeah, I'm going back to bed.
I talk about this to my students all the time. Like, what is the number that you absolutely will get out of bed for? Let's talk about like, you know, brands paying late, because I feel like this is such a hot topic on Threads. I know my students talk about this all the time. I like, even I like suffer through this all the time, to where like I'm constantly chasing after payment. Like, what are some of the steps that, you know, our listeners can keep in mind to like avoid this in the future? Like, what do we do when it happens? Like, you know, when should you be bringing in a lawyer? You know, like, what can we do? Can we add like a late clause in contracts? Like, has that been successful for you? Things like that. Because I mean, obviously, answer depends, right?
It depends, right? So I think, you know, obviously from the jump, you know, when we think about the risk that comes with these payment windows in the creator economy, net 30, net 45, net 60, you know what happens. And but you still want to work with them, net 90. We don't talk about net 90.
90, 120. Oh, I've seen the 120s and I'm just like, nope.
I told you, okay, actually, this is so funny. So I've worked with Naomi before. I've collaborated with her. And one of my presentations talks about payment timing. And it's important to really understand when payment is triggered. And there was one time where I caught, it was like net 30 from the end of the term. Most people, or net 90, I forget. Most people don't realize.
Like end of the term of the usage?
End of the term of the agreement. And sometimes they don't use the usage. It's like, you have to be very, very careful about payment and when it's triggered, because if it's triggered by the end of the usage period, which is well beyond when you've finished the services, that's a problem. If it's maybe, let's say, a year, because for some reason, like the brand wants to exercise an option to use or amplify the content for a period, and they, you know, built that in, you don't want to wait a year and a month. You don't want to wait 13 months to get paid. Like, so, or
like, I think I shared this with you. It was like net 30 or like net 45 upon receiving payment from the brand. That was just like, oh my God. What the heck?
Yeah, that one's like, oh, and it's
easily missed. Like, you can easily miss it.
It is. So my philosophy is this. First, we'll try. If this is something you want to try, you try for a late fee. But the likelihood of success of getting that in or accepted is low.
Yeah, very low.
It's low, and I am not alone in saying that. Naomi's proof of that. Other people I've talked to are proof of that. Clients I work with are proof of this. Like, and as much as I want to say, always put in a late fee, that only can work if it's your contract, right? Because you could do whatever you want with your contract, right? You could put whatever you want in the contract, so long as it's enforceable, right? Within reason. But when it's you against the brand or the agency's document, it is very unlikely that this will kick in, right? So then you have to look at what else can you do to protect yourself, right? When it comes to late payment, there is, you know, this idea that at the end of the day, we're all people. We all make mistakes. So it would only be fair to give people grace, right? When people mess up. right? In any business relationship, especially if you want to keep doing this for a long time.
Right.
It's all about relationship building. So to me, you follow up, as much as you can, and you kind of check and see what you're dealing with. Are you dealing with somebody who is responsive, or are you dealing with somebody that ghosts you, right? And that's going to kind of inform how it is that you need to escalate the response, right?
Yeah.
So then you have to look at your dispute resolution, your remedies, whatever it is, that the governing law, whatever. Like, one of these labels will talk about your rights and remedies in the event that there is a dispute, right? Sometimes that means that your dispute clause may say, like, you have to try to negotiate and figure this out in good faith before you escalate this to arbitration, mediation. Some will say you have to wait for us to get paid by the client and we're not responsible because, our hands are tied. But I would say, or I would, probably recommend that is said and that's committed in writing somewhere, right? Like, that somebody gives you that response, because otherwise you're going to have to assume that they're just refusing to pay you, right?
Yeah.
So it's important to kind of be persistent. It's important to understand how your contract kind of like works when it comes to payment and what triggers payment and what your rights are if there is a problem, right?
Yeah.
And then as far as like, getting a lawyer involved, right? Sometimes all it takes is somebody using their lawyer voice, as one of my friends would say, to kind of get them to pay attention, which is so unfortunate, because it really should just be, a matter of like being professional,
right,
to
I mean,
respond.
Like, I think that is like what, they like, a lot of creators think that like, oh, I can't be professional, I can't have a lawyer voice, like, or like exude authority. Like, dude, no, like, you could totally do that on your own. Like, you don't need to hire someone, you don't need a manager, like, just be authority, like, you just have authority.
Yeah, like, you just have to, be confident in what your contract says, right? Like, you have to be confident in like what you expect, right? And what those like the fact that these expectations are not being met. And that's pretty much what a lawyer does, is these are the expectations. Your contract says this. We're X amount of days out from being paid. And now you messed up. So what are we going to do? Please advise when we should expect payment. And sometimes, people will kind of drag their feet for a little bit, but it's going to just take persistence. Escalating it further to something like, let's say, mediation or a lawsuit, like, the numbers have to make sense, because doing all of that costs money. It's not free. People don't work on disputes like that on a contingency basis, at least not from what I know.
Yeah.
So it really is like about persistence, and it is also balancing the, professionalism and just being a little firm, but definitely not, taking it to a place where it gets personal, because it's not, it's business. We have to kind of we have to kind of put that aside for a second. And unfortunately, sometimes that happens where it feels personal, because it's your money, but you have to kind of like put that aside for a second to get to a place where people will cooperate and want to help you.
Yeah, totally. So obviously you'll do your best. Like, for me, I always have like something that I do all the time is having reminders that like, hey, this is still late, this has not been received. Like, and that is something that I do like, at least 2 to 3 times a week. And it's not like, obviously it gets frustrating when it takes a long time, especially when you're like worried about, okay, when is the money going to come in?
Right.
But like, ultimately, like, that's really all you can do. For me, like, I have trust that like the brand is going to hold their end of the deal.
Yeah.
And because we're playing the long game. And then also like, so for me, like, when I have a cash flow problem of like, okay, like, all these brands I'm seeing PR agencies or like this specific brand is always paying late, then I will do some risk management of like, okay, so like, how can we avoid this in the future? How can we make sure that I'm still good with the money that I got? I can still pay my bills, things like that.
Yeah.
And not have to worry about that paycheck so hard and relying on it in order to pay my bills. And so for me, like, something that's helped me a lot is like making sure that I have a pipeline of like, okay, continuous work. But because you're penny pinching, or like you only have that one deal, like you're kind of like sitting here staring at a wall. Okay, when is it going to come?
Oh,
And
yeah.
yeah,
Right.
it sucks, obviously. To me, I'm always like solution minded. I don't
Yeah.
worry about the problem. Like, okay, it's
Mhm.
gonna take care of itself
Yeah.
eventually. I will do everything in my power that I can control, but like everything else.
But speaking of pipeline, and I know this is your podcast, but this is what we do. You know, that kind of makes me think about like the whole diversifying your income conversation. And I'm just
Mhm.
wondering, as a creator who's been doing this for so long and, you know, obviously diversified your own income, like at what stage do you think that makes sense for people to like do that so that it becomes less of an issue that these late payouts are impacting their life?
Yeah. So I mean, for me, my experience was a little bit different because I got laid off. Because for me, like the plan was to stay in my job as long as I can until I
Mm-hmm.
can, you know, bank the salary that I'm getting from my job
Yeah.
and only surviving off of the brand deal payments. And
Yeah.
so I didn't even get to that point.
Yeah.
And so like I wanted to make sure that, you know, financially like I had an emergency fund, things like that in case like, you know, so that I have money or like
Mm-hmm.
I have kind of a runway for me to like go into it full time, like smoothly, sustainably, things like that.
Yeah.
But for me, it was kind of like I had to do it immediately. It was like during the pandemic. And so when I got laid off, I I was already working on, you know, my digital products, things like that. It wasn't working the way that I wanted it to, but I mean, obviously it's because it's still in the beginning stages. And so I had to think of things quickly. So I was offering coaching because, you know, my audience was already asking for it.
Mm-hmm.
And then Josh offered me the job to be a talent manager, which obviously didn't come right away as
Mm-hmm.
far as money either, but like I knew that it was going to be only a matter of time before it starts to yield some results. And so I think like you have to think about it kind of like long term or just have it in the forefront of like, okay, how do I want to see this like 10 years down the road, 5 years down the road?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think me like losing a six-figure income made it even more real.
Yeah.
And so, like, for me, I was just like, it's not a matter of like, oh, I'm just going to figure this out. I'm going to like take, like, you know, just like try this and try that and see what works. To me, I was just like, no, like, I have to replace a six-figure income. I have to know how to do this fast. And so, as far as like creators go, like, master one thing before jumping into another.
Yeah.
But obviously like don't jump into it full time without a game plan. So like I know a lot of creators like say, oh, you know, I'm making $10,000 this month, it's time for me to leave my job. Like, no, like you have to have a game plan of like, okay, like is this going to be like this sustainably? And then if it's not like if it slows down or if you have a month where you make $0, what are you going to do? And
Mm-hmm.
so, and that just comes with one having um the right guidance and the right mentorship support, but also like experience. And so, but like you don't obviously like you don't want to experience that having to be in the negative or like making nothing, but
Right.
like, you know, yeah, just like keeping that in mind. Like how
Mm-hmm.
can I create a sustainable business to where
Yeah.
I'm still getting paid every single month even though things are slow.
I mean, that is like, that's gold. That's gold right there.
Yeah.
So,
I know. And like I know you I mean I got this from you, like, and you talk about this all the time where you're saying like, you know, a manager does not replace a business plan. And there's always this like, you know, misconception that the next step for an influencer once they get all these followers is to find a manager, and that's not always the case. And so, you know, what are your thoughts on that?
yeah.
Throwing it back to you.
I am the guest after all. So, yeah, I listen, I think that before I start, I want to acknowledge that there is value in having a talent manager. There
Mhm.
absolutely is a time and a place to have one. And there is absolutely a time and place to not, right? And the
Mhm.
thing that people don't understand about where a talent manager fits into a creator's business is that a talent manager is not going to be the one to tell you how to do your job to get more brand deals. They're going to help you. They're going to support the influx of opportunities that you can no longer handle. Like that is their job, is to facilitate those negotiations and to make sure that they are, being handled by someone, because you don't have the time, right?
Yeah.
And that's where the commission makes sense, because you get the time back, right? In doing or paying attention to other things in your business you would prefer to do over being behind your inbox, being behind your computer, responding to emails and inquiries about working with you.
Yeah.
So that is not something that happens out of the gates, right? That's not something that creators are struggling with at the beginning of their career. I think what they're struggling with, I would say for the most part, is positioning, right? And strategy, right? And that's not going to come from a manager, because that's not their job.
Like, yeah, not every manager is equipped to help you with strategy. Like some of them, like I know managers who are like, well, I don't know anything about social media, like growth, or like how to make a video go viral, or like, I will make suggestions of what I've seen work.
Right.
But like that necessarily isn't like a strategy.
No. So, and that is, I think, a huge misconception. Like people think that creators with a team, when they say management, when they see that email, like they think that they are like also like somehow tasked with, the editing, the strategy, the social media plan and all that stuff. It's like those are roles that possibly, for maybe larger, more complex, productions, whatever, are assigned to other people, right? That is their job. They are strategists. They are social media managers. They are editors, all of those things. But none of that is happening in-house.
Yeah.
In a lot of agencies.
Yeah.
And when I hear or am approached by a creator who is considering management, and their problem isn't that they're overwhelmed with opportunities, it's that they are looking for more
opportunities.
I'm very aware of the disappointment that usually happens in those situations. And I usually try to advise them as best as possible about the realities of what it is actually like to work with a talent manager.
Yeah, exactly.
And I do my best to negotiate contracts that, allow them to leave if they're not happy. Because yes, I understand there's a risk on both ends, but if this isn't working out, this isn't a good working relationship, then creators should be able to leave without it being a whole to do.
Right. Yeah, some of them are like locked into like a year contract, and then you renew for another year, and then I've heard of those.
Yes, and then you have to like the renewal piece that I've seen in some, not all of them, but is that it'll renew automatically unless you tell them within like 6 months, or like within, something like 6 months, 3 months before it's set to renew.
That's ridiculous.
It's like, I don't really vibe with that. People should just be able to leave.
Right. Exactly. I mean, obviously, like, that's kind of the nature of the beast in any industry, that like clients will come and go. So it's like, just make sure that you're well prepared to like replace that one you lost right away.
Yeah. And on the, the other thing too is that I think that the other myth about working with talent managers is that the talent managers have the bandwidth to like, be there, like more hands-on than people realize. Like you're not really in touch with your manager that much.
Right.
You're not in touch with them unless they have an opportunity. And that's just because they're busy handling your influx of stuff and whoever else, is, that they're supporting. And that's another thing is like some of these creators are sending on to agencies that maybe represent like a pretty cool roster of like large creators, but like they're not going to give you the same level of attention.
Yeah. Right. So for example, like if they see, oh, like this creator that I follow and I love, like, or is being represented by this management, like the moment, like, you know, it doesn't necessarily mean that the moment you sign with that management, you'll get the same opportunities. Even if you create the same content, have the same following, things like that, it's not always going to be the same. And
because
like,
of positioning.
right, positioning, or ultimately like the brand is the one that calls the shots. It'll be like, yeah, we want to work with this person for this specific reason, but this other creator doesn't have it. And so, you know, we're not necessary. And that's why, like, for me too, like, I always even try to talk people out of it. Speaking on like absolutes as well, like I've seen this, like, that a lot of like talent managers like talk about on threads all the time, is like, oh, you know, we pitch our clients to brands, things like that all the time. And like, there's no context as to what you're actually doing when you're pitching. And this is why I don't ever like advertise to people that that's like, I do that as a manager. I do that, but within reason.
Yeah.
And it's not like an expectation that like, oh, like once you start working with me, I'm going to pitch you to the whole entire world.
Yeah.
Like that takes so much time.
Right.
And then I don't even have time to like, you know, like I don't even have time to do that. Like it takes me a long time to get my inbox down to zero with all of the things that my clients are busy with that are getting every single day in their inbox. And so for me, like, if pitching is what you're looking for in a manager, I immediately like, nope.
No. And it's like, you know, of course, I think people want help in developing that confidence and stuff like that. And so that's, you know, that of course is needed for anybody that's, you know, a service provider, myself included, right? Is like learning how to sell yourself and sell, you know, what you do and to the right people. But, you know, if pitching is the thing, then you have to consider an agent, and agents are not going to look at just any creator. Like the agents are also standing to make a commission, and they have the authority to be doing that as their primary function. And, you know, the reality with agents is that they are going to be expecting that can make, you know, a certain amount of money, that it's worth their time to, you know, deploy whatever resources they have to pitch you. And that's not going to happen at the beginning of any creator's career. It's going to take some time for a lot of people. Obviously there's, you know, the outliers who just blow up overnight and, you know, the opportunities just kind of flood in. But
I think like it's because you've seen a lot of these like big creators who like blew up overnight. Like they see that happen to her, like, oh, like, who was that girl that like had that 100-part story?
Risa Tisa.
Yeah, Risa Tisa. Like she got a management or like an agency and things like that. And so people think that like, oh, like I should just grow and then that's going to be my next step.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily true. And like, I don't think some creators and influencers like realize that as like any agent, any manager will evaluate the creator and look at the risks. Because obviously they're risking their own time. They're risking like their relationships with these brands. They're risking like how much money they're going to make. And so obviously they're going to bet on the best people and who are right for the job, or like that they know, okay, once I pitch them to these brands, or like once I present them to these brands, we're going to get a yes. And so like, and that's something that you have, like you as a creator, you as an influencer have to learn how to do. Like, okay, like how can I make myself marketable? And in a sense where like it's a no-brainer for the brand to say yes.
Yeah, like it's based on your presentation, right? It's based on how you are right now, right?
Yeah.
And of course that can evolve. People change over time, and that's why, you know, agencies may say no now, but they will say yes later. Like I have, you know, creators who I have one creator who's like worked with, I think, like 4 different talent agencies in the time that I've worked with her. Right.
Good Lord.
Yeah. Okay. Like talent management, sorry, just to be clear. And, you know, it's, and she's been approached by maybe 12, 15. I'm not even sure at this point, because there's just been so many of these conversations that I've had with her about this at this point.
Yeah.
And, you know, I say this, I talk about this because it's not they don't always work out.
Yeah.
You
It's
know?
like you've been in 4, like, can you identify the pattern?
Well, it's not her. The thing is that it comes back to something you mentioned earlier, which was this absolutes, these expectations that you know, kind of never came. And even with the conversations and things like that, you know, with this particular client, I can't say that this is the case for everybody, but this client's very good at communicating and is very good at like saying, okay, like this is yours, like can you like see it through? And like there are times where like either things didn't get finished, like they were never followed up on, so then the deal was dead.
Yep.
There were times where, you know, the creator saw that the agency was working with a particular brand. She was like, hey, like, so can you tell me like a little bit more about like what happened? Like maybe why did the things like not work out? Like she's a very receptive person and a very professional person. And I was just like, it didn't work out. And it's just like, there's a lot of soul searching that happens too with management. And it's not everybody's a great fit too. It's like another takeaway that I am seeing, because there's another one who I know, she did, I think she's on number 3, but yeah, it's just, it happens.
I mean, obviously, like there needs to be a connection and trust built and things like that. But also on the flip side of that, like, you know, the grass won't always be greener.
Yeah.
Like on, you know, especially when they're trying to like paint you a picture of what, you know, your business could look like, things
and what
like
they
that.
can
Like,
do for you. And it's like, if they're selling what they can do.
I don't do that. Like in the calls, I'm just like, how may I help you?
Yes.
Like I don't even like talk about like when I get on discovery calls, like I don't even do any kind of selling. It's probably like 30 seconds of it, but like other than that, like I answer them in it depends.
yeah, because that's all you can do. It's like a lot of this is not in a talent manager's control. Like you said, you know, it could be that they want to work with one person on the roster and not the other, and like you know, that's not really you know, because of them. It could be just because that's what the client wanted. But there's so much that you guys do that I don't think a lot of people realize, but like because they're so new and they're not making enough yet, the 20% is like, it's significant. It's not and it's significant that it could impact the way they live. And that's just like, I don't want to steal money. Like I want you to make money.
Right, exactly. Like, no. So if you're making like, you know, $1,000 or like $500, like keep 100% of it, because like you need that more than I do. But it's just like, don't, like, you know, a lot of these creators that do qualify for management, they do understand the type of risk that they're putting in, giving up like living off of 80%. Like, can you live off of the 80% for the rest of your career? And that's the question that you need to answer for yourself, because that's happened to me before, to where like, you know, it started off great and then it turned out like it just slowed down, and then they couldn't afford paying the 20% anymore. And so I'm like, yeah, you're just no longer in a position to be, you know, represented by a manager.
And that's tough. And I'm hoping that in this situation where they reach that point, that's kind of already been like identified by by management, right?
Yeah,
exactly. And I think that's usually what happens with management agencies that like let people go, is that like, okay, now it's not making sense for us, you know, to even collect 20%, because it's not enough to cover our overhead to do all of this anyway.
Right. Yeah. I think people don't realize the amount of overhead and amount of unpaid hours we do negotiating with brands that don't even fall, like that fall through.
Yeah.
So
and even on like the contracting side, it's like, you know, following up with them on like getting it finalized or getting a fully executed copy is like a whole other you know, thing that happens, and you're just like, why am I waiting this long?
Exactly. So what would be like the best way for content creators and influencers to obviously like protect themselves and have a bit like be able to develop a business plan when they're just starting out. Like, you know, they're not in a position to work with a manager, or maybe they don't have, you know, the financial means to have a lawyer on retainer and things like that. Like, what would be the best way for them to, you know, obviously self-manage effectively and successfully?
Yeah, I think that what is so cool about, you know, the time that we live in right now is that there is so much information, you know, that people publish online, you know, myself included. I mean, I've written a lot of articles that are free, that they're on free publications. And I think that's a really good place to start, is to do your research. And of course, you know, have the discernment, right? To know that, like, okay, who is this person, and are they the best person to speak on what I'm trying to understand? Because anybody can find, you know, a basic template for a contract, for example, right? But who is that contract designed for? Like, who was that for? Is this a real estate contract that I'm looking at, or is this a brand deal? You know? And I think it's important to really do some of that research, you know, and to find those resources that people like me or you have like developed to like help people have access in the meantime, right? Where like they can't afford to work with us, but like they need to understand some of these contract terms. Like, I've written an article for this newsletter, Passion Fruit, like about contract terms. I've talked about copyright infringement. I've talked about the FTC's, you know, disclosures, and those I think provide a pretty good, you
basic
know,
knowledge of like what should be in a contract.
Right. And other things that like kind of just happen, right? So I think it's important to do that research and to leverage that in the meantime. And then, you know, the other thing that I don't think people leverage enough with respect to lawyers is that some lawyers, maybe you can't work with them to do everything for you start to finish, but they may offer something like consultation calls, right? Where it's like the point of the call isn't so that I'm helping you negotiate, but I'm identifying like, hey, like, this is what's going on. Like, these are the things that like are kind of like red flags to me based on the situation you presented, right? And giving you guys some pointers for like an hour. And like, it's not the full fee. Like, it usually will be cheaper than having to work with them on the full scope.
Right.
But it's very helpful. And like, that's, you know, some of the people that I've worked with are just consultation call people that just need some guidance, and then they will handle the rest.
Yeah. Right. No, like that, like that's definitely very helpful. Do you have any advice for the next generation of content creators and influencers?
Oh man.
If you were to pick one.
One? Oh man.
One or two.
Gosh, you can't box me in like that.
Okay.
Let me think about it. Let me think about it. So I think the first thing, to read your contracts, to read and understand your contracts.
Yes.
Right? Like, and if you don't understand, then ask somebody who has the knowledge and the expertise. I'm just going to leave it there because we're just talking about the next generation. I'm assuming you're just getting started. And because a lot of creators start with brand deals, they start with those contracts, those releases that are terrible. It's important to understand what you're signing. And if you can't understand it, to ask for help.
Right. Exactly.
So those are my 2 pieces of advice.
Yeah. Love that. Yeah. Because I mean, there's all those brands that leave comments too of like, say #yes.
Those things take me out every time.
Oh my God.
Like, get out of here. Get out of here.
Yeah, and you know, even the regular person like gets so excited on that because like, you know, obviously they're not familiar with the influencer space, and so they don't really know anything about usages and licensing, things like that.
Yeah.
And so they're just like, oh my God, like Nike just left me this comment. Like,
oh yeah, I saw that.
Oh God.
I saw that and I was just like, no. And I know they were so excited. And
she was so excited. And then all of these people in the comments, and I was just like, nope, I can top this 100%.
And it's such a shame. And just to kind of like go back to what you were saying about you know, the everyday person who isn't, you know, a creator, it's like they don't have anything to lose. But when you're a content creator, you do. There's just more at stake for you because of the way that a lot of these terms kind of shake out when you read them.
Yeah.
And what you don't want, and this is kind of a consequence that's common among terms like this that happen in the comment section that people are supposed to consent to and are expected to read, even though you can't even open the link in the comments, but whatever. Anyway, you don't want to be saying like, hey, I have no problem with you using my image forever. And then you go and work with a competitor and then you see that they're still using it.
Yeah.
And now you're screwed.
And that definitely like taints like your future opportunities, because like let's say it was like Nike and Adidas, and you know obviously there's exclusivities there, and so if Nike's still using your image and then Adidas wants to work with you and wants to pay you, and then they see this and they just be like, well, no, we're gonna rescind our offer.
Yeah, and that's terrible. And you know, that's something that a lot of people promise in their contracts, is that you are not in some sort of agreement that would conflict or, you know, be in breach. And if there is something like you're not working with other competitors in there, not a cute look.
Yeah.
Not a cute look to be like, oh
No.
yeah, I forgot about that release that I signed, you know, 3 years ago when I was like starting out. And people understand, but it's just like you said, it's not a good look.
It's not. Yeah. So it's kind of like, you know, you own a Starbucks and then you're carrying around a Dunkin'.
Well, sus. Like, you're kind of like, so you don't like your coffee then? What are you doing here? You know, like,
just wanted to taste it, you know?
Right. And like, listen, I like variety in my life, but like, if you're showing up and telling me that you are, you know,
CEO
ride
of
or
Starbucks, and then you have a Dunkin' cup, like, I don't know.
Yeah.
But, you know, thank you so much for this, and thank you for taking the time to drop some nuggets and like really tell us a lot of really great stories. Where can we find you, and what services do you have available for creators?
Well, you can find me on Instagram or TikTok under the handle Curator _Counsel, and it's spelled COUNS as in Sam EL, so not CIL, because like that wouldn't make sense.
Right.
But just in case, you know, for anybody that's listening, I'm there on both of those platforms pretty regularly.
Awesome.
And services that I offer, so I offer contract reviews and negotiation services, strategy calls if you can't have me helping you, you know, end to end. And then I also am like into IP, intellectual property, so trademarks, copyright, content thieves. I've seen them all. So happy to help on that, happy to advise on that. And yeah, I'm here to answer any questions. So cool.
Yay, amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.